Imagine, if you will, living on an exposed platform, buffeted at all times by gale force winds, cut off for extended periods from any contact with the outside world, and always plagued by hordes of vicious sandflies. Well, for over 100 years, that was the unwritten part of the job description for the lighthouse keepers here at Puysegur Point at the southwestern extremity of Fiordland. This post was notorious within the New Zealand Lighthouse Service for its extreme isolation and desolate environment. Some men resigned rather than accepting a transfer here. Others absolutely loved it.
Desmond Dawson was a relief lighthouse keeper at several stations around New Zealand and recalls his time at Puysegur Point.
Puysegur was a great place to be. When it could have been a perfectly nice day in Puysegur, it was an hour and a half later, it was as bad as it could possibly be. So if the wind was 15 miles an hour, you never got worried with sandflies. Sandflies would not fly in that much wind.
Puysegur Point marks the western entrance to Foveaux Strait. As shipping increased around the coast and from Australia in the early 1870s, it became obvious that such a challenging stretch of coastline needed a lighthouse. In 1874, an expedition arrived on the government steamer Luna to find a suitable site for one. They quickly latched onto this spot, a flat plot of land elevated high above the strait and with a clear 180-degree arc for projecting a beam of light.
This sheltered anchorage was just a couple of kilometres away from the selected site, with a relatively easy route up through the bush where an access road now began to be built. Even so, it took almost 4 years to build the lighthouse here, 6 months for the access road line, and another 3 years to construct the original 18-metre high tower that was constructed from ironbark timber imported from Australia.
The light began beaming its warning signal out to sea on the 1st of March 1879. It was manned 7 days a week by a roster of 3 lighthouse keepers who lived with their families in a group of cottages and outbuildings erected alongside the tower.
And so began the longest continuous settlement in southern Fiordland. Conditions were extreme here from the get-go. The original head keeper ended his first year here with a pitch for extra pay to compensate for the extreme weather and terrible sandflies. Instead, they all got a 10% pay cut as part of a government-wide retrenchment.
Winds could regularly exceed 185 kilometres per hour. In 1886, the original tower had to be anchored to the ground with wire ropes to stop it swaying in the wind.
Meanwhile, daredevil young assistant lighthouse keepers were diced with death by leaning out over the cliff's edge into gales with their oilskins spread wide and trusting to the wind to blow them back to safety.
Supplies originally came in by the government steamer, supposedly at 3 monthly intervals, but they would often be delayed for much longer. Fresh provisions were a treat, with a diet of tinned food the normal regime. But there was plenty of fresh produce nearby for those at the lighthouse community brave enough to source it.
I walked down to a place where I used to go every day, and I'd swim down and get a crayfish and 2 power, and I'd put the 2 power in the thing and grab the crayfish and that to go home, and that would be it. Well, this particular day I walked down there and there was the first seal sitting beside the water, and normally when you went near them they just jumped into the water, but this day it didn't go, and I actually plunged in and thought, what the heck's that in front of me? And it looked like a side of a billboard. I mean, that sounds crazy, but a side of a billboard or a side of a sinking ship or something in front of you. And it was a very large female white pointer. And she was mildly agitated. Her fins were quite that in, but she hadn't shielded her eyes, which was quite a good sign. And she went round and swam back and came back and made them pass at me. And as she went past, the tail actually drew me back onto a rock, and I pling straight out of the water and then ran back with my fins on to get my rifle to shoot it. The next day, of course, it was really scary because all of a sudden you realise you weren't the ultimate predator. There was something in the water that was a hell of a lot more scary than what you were.
The isolation of Puysegur Point meant holiday leave for the lighthouse keepers was highly problematic.
One keeper, Alexander Parks, complained in 1896 that he had never taken a single day's leave in all his time here because it just took too long to get anywhere from here, and you're only allowed 7 days leave at one time. Now, they changed the rules in response to his complaint, but poor old Parks died within the year without ever having taken any of his leave. Communication, medical treatment and education for the keepers' children were all equally challenging for those who lived here.
I found with being in Puysegur for 22 days by myself, the hardest thing was actually when you start talking to yourself, but when you start talking to people, when you start to meet people again, you can't hard to get the tone right to actually, you're either shouting at them or you're talking in a wee whisper, you know. And I mean, flying from Puysegur, coming out from Puysegur to Invercargill Airport, and from Invercargill Airport to Wellington, was just amazing because everything was just so noisy. You'd be, oh, what's all this? And there's a woman, oh wow, and it was. But
this is a pretty magical place, wind and sandflies notwithstanding. It's set beside one of the best fishing zones in the country, surrounded by stunning bushwalks, and for the keen hunters among the lighthouse keepers, they had access to a 660-acre reserve of prime deer stalking country to which they alone had access rights.
we had 2 deer traps there, and we'd caught this particular first deer we caught was a huge big stag. And I came up and looked at it and we trapped it, and I thought, that's going to be at least $1,000 for that. And then the stag actually kicked its way out of the trap, and I was actually pleased. I was pleased that it had got free. I was money wasn't particularly important on a lighthouse station. It was good to see the stag actually burst out of the trap and be free. But some people loved it because the fishing was good and the diving was good and the hunting was good. And some people loathed it because it was very isolated and the weather was abysmally bad most of the time. My feelings was I was really enthusiastic about going. And the other thing which was terrific was that the library service used to supply 50 books. And it was amazing because the books would range from theology to something quite raunchy, to shipwrecks, to recipe cooking and the whole lot. And it would be virtually impossible to actually not find something in those 50 books, which came in each 6 weeks, that you could read.
Many of the lighthouse families enjoyed the wild nature of Puysegur and the solitude brought with it.
And one 20th century keeper's wife recalled a peacefulness here that she just never experienced anywhere else. That peacefulness was rudely shattered one day in February 1942. A man with mental health issues had taken up residence on nearby Coal Island about 6 months earlier after being released from care in Invercargill. He was living as a hermit, working as a gold prospector, but the beam of light from the Puysegur Point Lighthouse, constantly flashing, caused him to develop a sort of a delusion that he was being persecuted. In response, he made his way to the radio hut in the lighthouse community settlement here, where he was discovered smashing up the communication equipment and trained a gun on one of the assistant lighthouse keepers. Now, with the alarm raised, the small lighthouse community are locked down in their houses, but then they noticed smoke billowing from the lighthouse itself, which had been set ablaze.
Fortunately, no one was hurt in this incident, but the lighthouse burned to the ground, and one of the keepers' houses also suffered fire damage. A radio signal was successfully sent to the police in Bluff, who arrived in force next day. They stealthily surrounded the hermit's hut on the island and arrested him without resistance. Indeed, the man seemed to have no memory of what he had done and was perfectly civil to the lighthouse staff as he was being taken into custody.
It was the end of the line for the old wooden tower, however, quickly replaced by a new concrete model just 5.5 metres high, this one, which made it the shortest manned lighthouse in the whole country. At the same time, it was electrified, powered by a diesel generator that also supplied electricity to the nearby houses. And just 9 months later, it began beaming out its powerful light into Furthest Strait. There were lots of other technological improvements at Puysegur Point over time, including the laying of a telephone line from Oropuki in Western Southland to here in 1908, making it the most remote telephone line in New Zealand and a hell of a challenge to maintain. For the next 15 years, a team was employed to keep it operational, working in often appalling conditions, until in 1923 it was superseded by radio communication. The old access track was upgraded to a gravel road in the 1940s, thereby becoming New Zealand's westernmost formed road. By the 1950s, the all-important supplies were coming in at regular 3-weekly intervals by boat, upgraded in the 1970s to amphibious aircraft landing in the bay at nearby Te Oniroa. By 1977, it was just a short helicopter journey from Te Anau.
Yeah, we'd fly in, and that's part of the fun of it. We had all the legend of there was Bill Black and there was Hannibal Haynes, and they were absolute characters of fjords and helicopters. They were, when we were flying in with Bill Black, halfway, and the first time you're going in with him, he would take his hands off the controls of the helicopter and start loading his pipe and say, "Fly the helicopter while I load my pipe, will you please?" And I said to him, I'd seen this before and I heard this before, I said to him, "You're getting paid more money than me, mate. You fly the helicopter." Bill Black came in to pick me up one time to get me off. He came and he said, "What's the wind doing?" And I said, "Be aware it's doing 45 knots, which it was." And he said, "Yeah, copy that, 25 knots. And I said, "No, be aware, 45 knots. He said, "No, I can't understand what you're saying. It sounds like 25 to me." And I said, "25 it is." Because he was coming in to, he just came in around the edge of the lighthouse and just hovered there for a moment till the wind, and then pop up and straight down.
All that is gone now. The lighthouse was shut down in 1980, replaced by automated lights at Windsor Point and Cape Providence. The lighthouse keepers' houses and sheds were also removed at the same time, leaving behind just these concrete foundations, slowly being reclaimed by the bush.
There was a brief reprieve in 1987 when the Windsor Point light was shut down and Puysegur Point reinstated. It was one of the last New Zealand lighthouses to be automated, the final keepers leaving in 1990.
Puysegur was run down. It was shabby. I don't think at any stage the brass was ever polished in the lighthouse. Because it was a temporary one, there was a cow that was there, but she was dry. They hadn't milked it, and so she dried out off, so she was just wandering around doing nothing. The place was reasonably, it would have been the 80s, it would have been reasonably ramshackled. There were two houses, only one of which was occupied, and it just had a hippie-ish feel about the place rather than this almost a military feel that most of the lighthouses had. Puysegur Point was famous because it grew absolutely prime marijuana, and there was 2 covered gardens there to keep the deer and the possums off it, and no one ever really smoked it very much. It was just actually, everybody knew that Puysegur poison was there and just actually grew there.
There is now a modern rotating light here, powered by solar panels and monitored remotely from Wellington.
It seems to work. This modern light sends out its beam into Furthest Strait, providing an uninterrupted service to modern mariners. But for all its efficiency, it lacks the drama of all those lives that played out here in that little community over more than 100 years, that enjoyed or endured its splendid isolation and its incredible location on this clifftop promontory swept by winds more powerful than almost any in the country.